All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Digital Twins, Changing the Way We Service Products. My name is Thomas Berg, and I'll be one of your presenters today. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to go over. Everybody attending the session today is in listen-only mode, but we'd love to hear from you through the question box in your control panel or by tweeting us at Vertex VIS. We'll be answering your questions at the end of the webinar today. To start, let me quickly introduce myself before I pass it over to my colleague, Jim Zawicka. I'm excited to give this presentation today because being a service technician was my background before becoming a customer success manager at Vertex. I spent about 10 years in the industry working for manufacturers such as Cummins, and then on to Ziegler Caterpillar, where I became a component rebuild technician, and then ultimately ended up leading that department of technicians, where I allocated labor for about 20 individuals across 2 shifts. And I also managed the customer interactions for the department. But then as I was looking for something, a new challenge, I came across Vertex, and needless to say, I was quite excited about the possibility to fundamentally change the way I work as a technician. And that's what we're going to show you about today, is how your technicians, how your labor force can identify parts faster, see their work instructions in a more clear and ultimately way that gives them more confidence in how they're repairing their equipment. So when I came to Vertex, I started managing our customer interactions, and we'll get into some of that in a little bit. But before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to my colleague, Jim, and let him introduce himself.
Thanks, Thomas. Thanks, everyone, for showing up today. My name is Jim Zawicka. I'm the Director of Manufacturing Solutions here at Vertex, and was here from the very beginning. So like many of you, my career has been involved with pushing massive amounts of information around. I started as a mechanical engineer in the 90s, and I discovered, kind of like Thomas did, the ability to, how important it was to have 3D geometry and make it available across the enterprise. So my initial beginnings of that was with a company called Engineering Animation. Ultimately, I was at Siemens overseeing automotive OEMs and doing what they would call a digital prototyping solution. And the whole idea was to get massive amounts of visuals aligned to the community so they could make decisions quickly with that information and interact with it real time. And we were very successful with that in engineering. So one of the things that we originally intended to do was to make this available across the enterprise. And we succeeded in engineering very strongly, but the rest of the enterprise was more of a challenge. And we'll go over that. Ultimately then led us to the starting of Vertex, is to really address what prevented us from providing the value of this information across the enterprise, and make the process to deliver this much, much easier for both engineering, the IT groups, and then the people actually receiving it on the back end. So Vertex, so after 20 years of essentially the same tools being used, we got the band back together, you could say, to really readdress this, try and fix the barriers that have prevented true democratization of the geometry across the enterprise. And so that's really been my passion my whole career, and we're going all in on this with Vertex to really address this and fix it so we have a good solution for the future and for today. Thomas, can you hop forward, please?
Mm-hmm.
So I discussed some of the issues that we had with respect to what has prevented us from being able to distribute this across the enterprise. First of all, a lot of the 3D visuals were authored in engineering, and as such, there was heavy investment on the hardware side for them. So they would get the most expensive machines, they would get the most expensive software, they would get the most expensive training even to prepare them to build all of these assets. And thus, since they had that sort of environment for themselves, they could consume it in an easier way. That it wasn't that was easy for them, but the rest of the enterprise didn't benefit from all of that hardware training and software. Thus, there's a lot of work to be done to prepare that geometry. Like, you have a full car and you want to give it to someone downstream, generally if they have a cheaper computer or maybe even a different form factor, like they needed to use a phone or a tablet, you had to convert that geometry, reduce it, make it simpler, do a bunch of things so that those devices could actually handle that information. And that was a very time-intensive process. So administratively, whether it was something on the engineering side that they had to prepare or something on the receiving side, say marketing or manufacturing or service, there was an agreement for them to just put that time in because the administrative effort to prepare it was worth the cost to the benefit to receive it. And as such, there was always a limited, you had to make a decision, you had to almost do an ROI on this data prep to get it ready to go downstream. And so generally what that meant is if you had thousands of products, you would pick the top ones only to send down. And so what we knew that was just a very, very big barrier to the ability to receive this information. And so as far as Vertex is concerned, we wanted to wipe all that out. We wanted to get rid of the quality issues, the administrative time. And so if Thomas, if you'll jump to the next slide, I'll show you how we've done this. So we built this, we built the Vertex platform really to take on any size model, meaning 1 million BOM lines or billions of polygons, and be able to get the same exact experience on any device. And then one thing that doesn't really get a lot of press, but companies that do put an investment in on the hardware side to try and emulate what we've done here, they typically fall over very quickly when there's a lot of users in there using the system at the same time. And we've addressed that as well. And whether you're just a handful of people or thousands, you're going to get the exact same experience in the Vertex platform as you would expect them to have. You want them. You don't want degraded performance as more and more people come in, or as the models get bigger, that sort of thing, or if they're on different devices. And so the Vertex platform is really meant to be massively scalable in all of those areas so that everyone gets the right experience and the right context for what they need on whatever device they need. So go ahead, Thomas. So then just to kind of go a little more granular on what we've done is we want to be what we call a system of engagement for the digital twin. So if you look on the bottom, you'll see sort of legacy sources of information, silos, perhaps you know it as, where you have product lifecycle management information, you have manufacturing execution system information, ERP, CRM, IoT even now. And those sources of information generally are held by different groups, definitely not aligned to a single server, a single source. So this is all information that's distributed across the enterprise. And so while Vertex does not and will not be a master record of source, what they want to do, or what we want to do, is we want to align to these sources of data and then make them easily available to the groups that you see on top. So whether it's engineering, manufacturing, sales, customer service, all of them are going to need to see this visuals, this information, this BOM. They're all going to need to see it in their own context. But what Vertex does for you is it allows everyone to use the same information, the same visuals, the same 3D geometry, the same BOMs, but they're able to view it in the context that makes the most sense for them. So engineering will be looking at an EBOM, manufacturing will be looking at an MBOM, sales will be looking at a order list perhaps, or possibly called a price list, where build and quote or build and price. You want that experience to be logical for them. Service, for example, which is what we'll focus on today, is they want to be able to see work instructions or assembly, disassembly. And the whole point is while all of these groups get to see this information, how they need to see it, it's all still aligned to the native sources, and it's all still the same assets that everyone is using, but they're able to view it nicely in their own context. All right, Thomas. So we've gone through a few different groups. So you can see here some use cases that we would be using. The digital thread is on the bottom. You have engineering, perhaps doing an as designed use case, sales doing it as ordered, maybe IoT, or the plant floor is pulling in IoT data from their Andon system, and and at Vertex you could overlay that and do visual focus events within that. Manufacturing, maybe focusing on as-built bombs. But today, and what we're going to look at today, is the service group and how Vertex can improve the process, improve the use case, the workflow, the experience of the service group. And so let's go ahead and hop to the next page, and then I'll throw it back to Thomas and he can give you his view.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Jim. So I think before we jump into the demo, I just want to explain my perspective. And as a technician, I'd fix $1 million pieces of equipment that ultimately I would use two-dimensional drawings to identify and order my parts. I'd sometimes have to go from one drawing to the next just to complete a simple repair. In a similar way with work instructions, a lot of it was just a simple 2D picture where I'd have to try to understand the context of how something went back together. Sometimes I'd have to make educated guesses. Sometimes I'd have to take pictures of my own before I took something apart to understand what it was supposed to look like when it went back together. And this little product context led to a lot of on-the-fly decisions, having to stop and ask somebody else and take valuable time and resources away from the shop floor. And ultimately, what I want to show you today is something that's going to change the game for service teams everywhere, and how our product is helping solve that solution that we see in the industry with continuing to work with these two-dimensional drawings. Not to mention the fact that our experience has been that it takes a lot of time within engineering to come up with these 2D drawings from the 3D, and I'm sure Jim can talk about that a little bit later. But before that, let's go ahead and get into our demo. So, should be able to see my screen here in just a moment. And Jim, maybe as I start moving through here, you can explain to the audience what they're seeing.
Yeah, let's talk about the Vertex platform and why what you're seeing here is different than what other people are doing, other companies are doing. So as Thomas does really sort of normal gestures and manipulations of the geometry as he's zooming in on that filter there, as he's rotating, selecting, all of that is, again, normal activity that you would expect a lot of solutions to do, and you'd be right. The difference here, the big difference, is that the way Vertex does this is that I've spoken about device independence, or not relying on the device to handle any of this visual activity. And the way we do it is we do run out of the cloud, but we don't run out of the cloud in the traditional sense where you are kicking the hardware problem up to the cloud, meaning, okay, we're not going to have the expensive client, we'll just have an expensive virtual machine laid into the GPUs, and then screen scrape that and then send it to the device. And in theory, that's now device agnostic. We know that is a very expensive option. It's not scalable. You run into trouble quickly. And so we completely rethought how we do rendering and how we do visualization at Vertex. So in fact, what you're seeing here is we don't use GPUs up in the cloud. We have a massively parallelized process where we have numerous CPUs. So essentially commodity level hardware in the cloud, and we'll take small fragments of the geometry. So even like a single part, we broke it up into more subparts, and then each CPU will handle each of those fragments. And then we render that fragment, and then we composite and stream an image to your device to give you the impression that you have the 3D geometry on your client. But all that's actually happening is you're getting an image that aligns to the events that you do, the behaviors that you do. And so it's the benefits are very high. With the platform being very scalable, it allows us to essentially have unlimited size models, bombs, polygons, and then also they have as many users as we want to make sure that they're getting the right experience. So for Vertex, really that's the key differentiator for us, is that we build a very scalable, performant platform that can handle essentially any models or any demand that you're going to put on geometry for the right experience for the right people. So in this case, what you're seeing is embedded into a user experience for service. In this case, we've embedded into that the visuals, and then you're able to connect web components within the HTML page and align them to the visuals. So I'll let Thomas walk through the service use case so you can see it.
That's great. And I think what we want to highlight here is the speed and ease of use, because as a technician, technology adoption can be difficult sometimes. So trying to find a product that's ultimately easy to employ, easy to work with is critical. And that's what I found incredibly valuable about Vertex when I saw this for the first time, was it's so intuitive. But with parts identification, like we're wanting to look at here, you'll notice we've got a parts list over on the right-hand side of the page. If I simply click on a part that's there, it highlights that part on the right-hand side. Or if I know the part that I'm looking for, I can see exactly where that's supposed to end up in my car here. So if I was a technician and I had a part that was left over, I could instantly figure out where this part was supposed to go and if it was crucial to my repair. Along with this, I would be able to go into a machine or into a car, just find the part that I needed, click on it, order it, and go right back to my day and ultimately taking care of the customer and what the customer needs, which is to get back out on the road or to get back out in the dirt. Well, let's go ahead and let's take a look at another use case. And I think real briefly, we talked about parts identification, and what we wanted to show you there was how quickly and easily it was to identify parts. Now what we'd like to show you is an example of how Vertex can enable work instructions. We talked in my introduction about how it's difficult, and there's definitely some guesswork involved in work instructions because it's non-interactive. It's typically a picture or a 2D static image that's just in a quick series, and you have to try and figure out how things go back together. With Vertex and leveraging the geometry, we can simply add parts quickly, effectively. The colors all come into context, and it's designed exactly the way the engineer wanted it to. Not to mention the fact that the geometry can be updated. But I think one of the things that was also impactful is you can go right back down the same direction, and say this car had been running out on the road for 50,000 miles, or you had a machine that was out in the dirt for 10,000 hours. It's kind of tough to disassemble that and know exactly what it looks like. So with this brake caliper, I could simply come in here and know, look, there's a couple of hex bolts that are holding that on. Or how would I know that that's an Allen and that's a Torx? It'd be difficult to tell if it's been out and running around for quite a while. But our system enables us to see what things are supposed to look like. It would have made my job so much easier being able to disassemble parts or components. Jim, do you have anything you want to add to this portion of the demo?
You alluded to the connectivity to the geometry and how it stays updated. So all of these assets that you built, when they're still aligned to the native sources, if something is newly released, a new part is now affected in, this geometry actually would be updated. So you wouldn't have to go recreate all of these assets to show the latest the geometry. And so we just wanted you to know that as these assets are built out, you still maintain connectivity. It's not a big maintenance exercise to go in and fix all of that.
That's incredibly key. Great. All right. Now let's go ahead and get back to our slideshow here, Jim. So I think if you cover the first point, Jim, I'll take the second too.
Yeah, so that's kind of, I just alluded to that in the last slide there, or the last when he was doing his demo, is when you have a digital twin, one of the biggest problems historically was that you were orphaning off data just for particular use cases or for different groups. And when you think of a digital twin, what you want is to have a digital representation of every product that you have available, delivered to the right person, and them able to view it in the right context, so it provides value to their use case. And so Vertex plays very well in that space because we do stay connected. We do stay aligned to all the native sources of information, data, 3D data. As that flows through, we're able to align the correct visuals to that information so that it can be used downstream, whether it's customer facing, whether it's for service, whether it's for marketing. But we wanted to make sure that humans are very visual. They can understand things if you see the visual representation of it versus just reams of text. And we wanted to be able to provide a way to align the right visuals for the right people to see.
Yeah, I think that's so true, and it really ties into this next point of being able to perform online technician training. And oftentimes as a technician, if I would go to training or extra schools to learn about a new product coming out, similar to our work instructions, I would have to learn from pictures. Sometimes we were fortunate enough and we'd be able to bring a machine into the shop, take it apart for the sake of our school, or sometimes we'd have an example part that could be taken apart in the classroom. But that wasn't always the case. Unfortunately, that led to having to continue to learn as you're on the job and trying to figure it out as you go. Ultimately, with Vertex and understanding what that 3D geometry looks like, I could have had more confidence coming out of a class, and even being able to learn remotely, understand what the geometry looks like, understand how something comes apart and how things are supposed to be working in the internals of, say, a transmission. I think the third and final point I want to bring up before going to some questions is that service and engineering aren't overly connected right now. Our platform would enable a way where engineering would be able to understand defects, would be able to pick up on warranty for continuous improvement from technicians, where ultimately that feedback would create better products, better information. And Jim, you can speak to that as well. If I think you've said before that engineers welcome feedback. They constantly want to be making their products the best products that are available.
Yeah, I think so. And I think one of the issues there is your time. And there was never really a way, even if you knew who to talk to, for you to stop what you're doing, capture the problem, and then make sure it gets delivered upstream, for lack of a better term. I think that was just a little bit too heavy of a lift for you guys. You needed to get moving. You needed to get, to get on to the next job. Through the Vertex platform, we wanted a way that the technician could quickly highlight and say, boy, it would be nice if, or I notice a lot of failures of this part, and then just capture that quickly with the visuals, send it off, and then through the Vertex platform, we would have connectivity to those parts. We would know who those engineers were, and then we could create an event that could get in front of them, or threshold, so they could ever need to go look and see, I wonder what's going on with this part, So anyways, you're connecting them together, and it provides an easy way for the service technician to capture this information and then get it in a position to be delivered to the right people so the right decisions and right transparency can be made.
That's great. Thanks for adding your extra take there, Jim. Well, we've got a couple of questions to get to, so I'm going to go ahead and let's take this one from the audience. Jim, I think I'll have you answer this one. And this person's saying, this looks great, but how do I get here? I've never had access to data like this before, and I don't even know where I would start.
Yeah, you're not alone. The fact that for the first time ever, there's the opportunity for you to get high fidelity visuals that can be used in conjunction with your job. But how do you create the pull? And most companies today have what would be called a digital transformation initiative or strategy or project. I would recommend that you, through your internal web pages or however your flows go there, is to look for phrases like digital transformation, or look for someone who's on the new tool sets or new strategy processes team. I was on that team myself from a couple of different big OEMs, and we would have been very welcoming of any, I guess you could say, pull from downstream or demand to have the opportunity for them to participate in figuring out what we could do for them to make things better. But those teams are out there. You just need to dig a little bit in your own company's systems, and they'd be more than happy to work with you, I'm sure. And then they would love to hear your voice to see what value they could provide to you.
Great. Jim, I think this one will also be for you. And the question says, how is the automation of data handled and delivered to the end user?
Yeah, kind of touched on this a little bit throughout the webinar here, but we import native CAD into our system. We import also almost every single neutral. And what we do is we tie into your sources of data. So whether it's your PLM system, your ERP system, your product data management system, even a file system, it all depends on how you guys handle your 3D visuals. We have APIs that will facilitate the ingestion of that information, of that geometry into Vertex. Generally what happens is we'll sit down with your IT team and really just see what you got. No one's ever out of the box with the tools, so you always have a little bit of a customization there on your side. And what it ultimately ends up is a mix of our REST API toolkits to your solution and possibly their APIs as well. So it's kind of a hybrid. And we just look at what you guys want. How often should it be updated? What trigger events should send it in? And in essence, the flexibility is there to really customize this, or to put a solution in that you'd be happy with, that's very secure and very easy to implement and to consume.
That's great. All right. I think I'll go ahead and handle this next one, Jim. This person's asking, so you're saying my technicians could view this on their phone? And my answer to that is absolutely. And from my perspective as a technician, if I could have been down, buried in the middle of an excavator and pulled out my phone to see how a hose was supposed to be routed, or where a part was supposed to go, I'd be able to click on it quickly and easily, find what I need and get right back to work. I don't have to crawl out. I don't have to find a computer or ask somebody a question. I can do what I need to do right there. And I'm running out of time here, but I think we've got time for one more question. So Jim, I'll let you handle this one. And this person is saying, if my data is being passed around to thousands of technicians, what are the security measures in place?
Yeah, that's a good question. We do align to your security model, so your access control. If you guys have single sign-on, validation for your technicians, we align to that as well. So you're not having to reinvent that wheel. Also, with sometimes there's a version to having your assets as it's perceived into the cloud environment. What we do is when we convert your native CAD to, I guess, the special format that Vertex, the Vertex format, we throw away the CAD afterwards. So we have the Vertex representation, which, if you remember, is essentially little teeny fragments of your geometry that are encrypted and then distributed across numerous clusters. So what we do then is we pull out those, unencrypt them, and in essence, it's essentially confetti that's mixed up with other confetti. So if anyone actually went into the data warehouse to pull out a box, all they would get is encrypted gibberish, essentially, of the geometry that you have up there. They would never ever get a full product, even if they went to the trouble to unencrypt the little fragments. And as far as access of the technicians and the thousands of them, we don't cache the geometry to the device. All we do is we'll send an image that they're allowed to see to that device. So oftentimes with existing solutions, they will cache the 3D geometry to the device, let the device handle the geometry or the visualization experience, but they actually physically have a copy of it on that device. So in theory, they could kind of go in there and reverse engineer it. That's not the case with Vertex. All they're getting is an image. You have full traceability of all of the events that are happening, so you know who's accessing what, when, and where. And you can, if there's any sort of flagging that's going on about behavior, you at any time can cut them off and they no longer have access to that. So we've built a very secure environment that aligns to the way you guys handle your access control. And so Vertex plays very well in that solution.
That's perfect. Thanks for tackling that one, Jim. Well, that's all we have time for questions today. There are a few more questions we didn't get to, but we'll follow up with you directly. We'll be sending out this recording of this webinar as well as the slide deck and a couple of additional resources about digital twins tomorrow. You can always visit our website, vertexviz.com, to learn more about our product offerings. Thank you for joining and have a great rest of your day.